Okay, so I just want us to do a little bit of a warm-up, okay? So I want everyone to just cross their hands in front of them like this, okay? Everyone just cross your hands in front of you. All right. Wow, that turns out to be harder than it looks for some people. All right, now turn your hands over like that. Yeah, right, exactly. So that's what it feels like to most organizations. Keep thinking about it. You'll get it by the end of the talk. People are going to be sitting here for the next hour just doing this. That's what it feels like to most organizations when people say, be more innovative. That's awesome. I love watching everybody's like, yes, this is... That's not very helpful, be more innovative. And my personal view, having spent a lot of time looking at how companies inadvertently prevent their own innovative processes, I've come to the decision that a lot of people care about innovation, and a lot of people have these sort of basic ideas that are in the right direction about innovation, but there's shockingly little help that anyone has on a very practical basis for how to create an environment to drive innovation. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is not any specific technology. I want to talk to you for a little while about the process of innovation. I want to see if I can live up to the challenge that I just gave and give you some very concrete things which you can do if you're the person in an organization who's been tasked with innovation, or if you're the person running an organization who has to get your organization to be innovative over time. It turns out this is not a big company problem. This is a problem even for tiny pre-revenue companies, that their ability to be innovative drops off very quickly after they start. So let's start with what innovation is. I don't, by innovation, mean improvement. Lots of companies are good at improvement, and most companies that survive for even a year or two actually get better at improvement as time goes on. That's not the hard part. Improvement just means that you are, on some measure that's important, better today than you were yesterday. That's fine, but that tends to a kind of incrementalism, which is very valuable to your current business, but ultimately becomes a problem because you can't reinvent yourself, right? So by innovation, I mean the process of coming up with something which is enough better that you would never have gotten there, or it would have taken so long that it might as well be never. You would never have gotten there via some incremental process. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to be radically better, and Singularity University is about radical betterness, so that seemed appropriate. I'm interested in hearing about your radical better ideas. That's part of what I do at Google, is solicit from the world radically interesting ideas. So part of the reason that I've come here today to talk to you is to inspire you, and I would love to hear from you tomorrow or a couple months from now about your radically better ideas, and I'm hoping to hear about some of them by the end of the summer from some of you. So in no particular order, let me just hit some of the things which are sort of near and dear to my heart and that I think have been missed. So one of my favorite is that people say, even in a tiny company, especially sometimes in tiny companies, we can't do innovation now. We just did innovation. There were like 3 of us and a dog in a garage, and we had our like big innovation moment. And now we have to get our nose to the grindstone. We just got our money from the VCs. We now need to go make it real. And the VCs are pushing for that. And innovation can't be some rubber chicken that you wave at your VCs as an excuse not to focus. Totally. But innovation is also not the sort of thing that you can put in a drawer, put in the deep freezer, and then get out later when it's convenient for you to do. Because innovation, the process of being innovative as an organization, is a cultural thing. It's a habit. Innovation is habit forming, and not being innovative is also habit forming. So you're completely kidding yourself. So the worst possible thing you could have, I'm focusing on this, third formula here for innovation. The worst possible thing you could do is to have nobody at your company be thinking about innovation or think it's their job to do innovation. There are very few companies that fall in that category, at least in name. There are many companies that fall into that category in practice. It's much more common for everyone to think that it is their job to be innovative. That's better than the worst case scenario, but not much. Because as you all probably know, how many people here have run a company before? Even a small one. Okay, so that you all know that when everybody's accountable, nobody's accountable, right? And yet, when you go into a company, they love telling you, we're all innovative here. We're all about innovation. Everybody here's an innovator. Fail. Well, imagine if you came to a company and they said, we're all about sales here. We don't have a vice president of sales. We all do sales here. We don't have a vice president of marketing. We all do marketing here. We're all marketers. Like, no, right? But that's what they say about innovation, as though it were something that, like, everyone could add like one finger's worth and somehow the whole ship would rise. It just doesn't work like that. But we kid ourselves for a whole bunch of weird cultural reasons. The right way to do it, just like with engineering, you have to have a VP of engineering. Someone has to be responsible for making this stuff. There has to be a person whose job it is to drive innovation. That is not the same as a chief technology officer. It might happen to be your chief technology officer, but I want to make this distinction because people often just fall into the trap of thinking we have a CTO, therefore we have a chief innovation officer. So first of all, lots of CTOs are chief innovation officers. I'm not saying that they're not. But many of them are not. Many of them become chief fundraising officers. Many of them become the de facto VP of engineering. Many of them actually are savants at one thing that was the initial innovation which caused your organization to start, but they're not gifted at the routine of producing new ideas. That is the regularization, the systematic production of innovation, right? And so it doesn't matter how smart she is, the CTO, it's not good enough. You can't put her in charge if it's not her special skill to create innovation, either herself or with a group of people. You need that person to say, my main job is innovation. And by innovation, that means it has to be weird. It has to be counterintuitive. It has to be upsetting, even to the people in this organization. If it's not upsetting, it's incremental, almost literally by definition. That is not a normal position to be in. And those people have to very particularly, you as the CEO, the person running the business, have to know what the name of the person is in your organization, whose job it is to be the innovator in your company and to help promote innovation. And they need to know it too. They need to be able to say it back to you and get on your case if they're not allowed to be weird and counterintuitive in those ways. So that is a very concrete thing about innovation that I think people give lip service to, but they don't really do. I'll pick another one here. If you don't have a story, you don't have innovation. So a lot of innovators, especially in the technology space, tend to be very technical people. Oh, by the way, and this is apropos of technical people, your CTO could be your chief innovation officer, but innovation is about perspective shifting. That's what innovation is. And so a designer can be your chief innovation officer. A marketeer can be your chief innovation officer. There are forms of innovation which are changes in distribution. Even a salesperson could, in principle, if that's their gift, help regularly drive innovation in your company. Now, often they tend to be technical people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But assuming that they're technical people are not trained to be storytellers. And without a story, there is no innovation. So presumably you've all heard this before. Somebody comes running into you and says, I've got an X. And this X, are you ready? It's a frictionless surface, right? Or I've got it defies gravity, or whatever the thing is. That's not useful. They didn't say a benefit. Frictionless is not a benefit, right? Our cars depend on the friction between the tire and the road. If those tires were frictionless, it would be a bad thing, not a good thing. But these people routinely come to you with technical advances and not stories. If you want innovation, one of the very practical things that you can do is make a story. So different people have different things for it. Sometimes I ask people to make me the movie poster. Sometimes I say, write the press release. You think you have an innovation. You think it's cool that it's a frictionless surface. Awesome. Make me the press release as though you were a marketeer. Show me what it's going to sound like 4 years from now when we release this. I don't care if it's a Three Little Pigs story that's 20 sentences long, but tell me a story. Okay? If you ask them, you say, I'm not interested in ever hearing from you again unless it includes the story, here's what will happen. Number one, there's a bunch of stuff that they'll consider bringing to you and won't, because they think it's pretty cool, and then they'll realize there's no story. Good, right? They just saved you some time and they learned something. Sometimes they will, in fact, come up with a story. Usually that means that they did extra work. Now they're even more passionate. They can communicate their passion to you even better than they could have before because now they're armed with this story, because that's going to be your first set of questions, is like, who cares about this? How's this going to get out into the world and actually make a huge impact in the way that your passion would imply that it's going to? Okay? And if you get excited, now you have a story which you can take to other people. They sort of preloaded you with something portable. Okay? So by the way, I'm just going to keep ranting until people start asking questions, and I don't mind in fact, it's going to be somewhat disappointing if I get through this whole thing without you guys asking questions, so don't be shy. Yes, kudos for asking questions. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people would say that innovation is a new buzzword for the quality department. What's your thoughts on that? Because they would say, oh, people are doing, this is the new quality department.
I guess I've never seen an innovation center and a quality center ever coexist at all peacefully. You need to be interested in quality, but the entire notion of quality depends on regularity, on already being in the market. Innovation needs to be freed from constraints. Sometimes you can create innovation with additional constraints, but usually you have to relax constraints in order to get innovation. So I would try to keep the innovation department and the quality department separate and not talking to each other as much as possible. Because don't worry, somewhere between innovation's over here and the market is over here, don't worry, the quality department's in between somewhere. Like, it won't actually hit the market without hitting the quality department first. So how about the second formula up here? So I'm the boss, okay? And I've got Sam. And Sam has been tasked with me with innovation. Go make something weird. Go make something counterintuitive. Make it big, make it huge, right? That's what Sam's mission is. If I don't spend the time with Sam to understand when Sam has what he believes is an innovation, if I won't understand the details, and I don't trust him and/or set up metrics around him to sort of control my exposure when I just trust him, if I do neither of those things, what am I signing myself up for? I'm signing myself up to take a quick guess about whether Sam's idea is right or wrong. So Sam spent a month, he spent 6 months, he spent it in a closet by himself, he spent it with 50 other people. It doesn't matter, but now he's got a story, let's say, and he's got this cool technology, maybe he's got a prototype, and he's like, this is it, man. This is it. This is going to change the whole world. And I'm going to make a decision, we just decided, in this thought experiment, where I neither spend the time to really understand what he's talking about, nor am I willing to trust him or create metrics to control my exposure to letting him go further. So by definition, what I'm going to have to use is my intuition. But innovation is by definition counterintuitive. If it was intuitive, we would already be doing it. I would already have suggested it because it's my intuition that we're talking about here. If you don't do one of those two things, either spend the time with the innovators to let them to help them communicate to you deeply what the situation is and to get past that counterintuitive threshold, or it's acceptable not to do that, but then you have to create metrics and gates. You think you can make a frictionless surface? Okay. You know what? I'll give you $500,000. I want to see you make a train car this big and just push it, and I want to see it go for half mile. Right? Just there. Like, you should be able to do that for $1 million. I don't have to think about it anymore, and I'm not offering you 50 million. I'm only offering you 1. Right? Now you can go prove something to me which I have a sense you can't do and seems like it's generally in the path of using the frictionless surface. Right? But if you don't do either of those, you're guaranteeing that you won't get innovation. Or worse, you will place big bets based on your intuition, And that is generally the wrong thing to do. It's explicitly what you asked Sam not to do, right? You asked Sam to take you outside of your comfort zone, and then you only let Sam win, that is move forward, in areas that are actually inside your comfort zone. And this happens all the time. You'll often hear, you shouldn't take big bets, you should take lots of little bets. This is the top formula up here. Awesome. I couldn't agree more, right? So when you take little bets, so imagine we have a table in front of us, and it's full of lottery tickets. We all kind of know intuitively that you would scratch a little bit at a lottery ticket. And as soon as you could kind of tell whether it was going to be a winner or a loser, you would throw it in the winner or loser pile. And you'd probably come back late in the day and do really accurate scratching only on the ones that look pretty promising. You wouldn't scratch really thoroughly at each one. It's a waste of time, right? That's not efficient. You would do them at a cursory level and only go back to the ones that look promising to do a more detailed scratch. But that's not what people do in business. It's kind of weird. We don't place one-day bets. We don't even place one-month bets usually. We place year-long, multi-year-long bets, and we call them innovation. They may, in fact, be attempts to be innovative. But it's just not the right way to do it. So here's a story of a study that was done. There were two large pottery classes in a university. And they tried an experiment with these two pottery classes. To one pottery class, they said, your entire grade will be based on the quality of the final piece that you throw in the kiln at the end, and you show it to the judges, and that's your grade. The other group, they said, 90% of your grade will be based on the weight of clay you fire during the semester. And 10% will be based on how good your final thing is that you fire. And as you might imagine from the point of my story, what happens is that the pots that are created by the second group in their final exam piece are incomparably better than in the first. Because you just learn more and go faster and explore a much broader place of the space if you are allowed to be experimental, to try things, to see failure as a natural part of the process instead of a problem. So what could you do to promote these little bets? So little bets is a great idea, but let's get practical. What could you do if you're trying to create an environment for innovation so that these little bets actually get placed? So here's a very concrete thing you can do. Tell someone, Sam, you want to bring me an innovative idea? Awesome. But don't bring me any idea that you want me to fund and go forward with unless you bring me a minimum of 10 ideas that you think are bad. You already worked on them and you've ruled them out. Now this sounds like a gameable proposition, right? Sam is just going to come up 5 minutes before he shows up in my office with 10 ideas that are just retarded so that he can be like, oh, here are the 10 ideas that are retarded. Now can we talk about the one I actually care about? First of all, that's not actually what happens. They start thinking about it. But even if they do that, it'll be more than 5 minutes. Before they get to the end of those 10 things, one of those 10 things will stop them from showing up in your office. And they'll go, you know, that's not a bad idea. Right? You've already won, right? You are trying to force them not to take too much emotional attachment to their idea, but to try more, to churn more, and just by making that requirement. You can't make a requirement of a factor 10 with prototypes, but I've seen a factor 3 work. Don't bring me one that you're excited about unless you bring me 2 physical prototypes, software prototypes that you've already discarded. I want to see you've implemented them. If it was important enough for you to make something that worked, you should have been making things that turned out not to work. Because if you have nothing to show me that didn't work, I don't believe that you're taking little bets. And if you make that a rule, even when they try to game the system, they will make massively more progress. These things sound really basic, but I guarantee you, you're like, yeah, that's totally. It's shockingly hard to get even yourself to do it when you're running the organization. These are scary things to do. And part of the reason that they're scary is because they feel emotionally, just feels wrong. It feels like you're going to waste time. So another one, new tools and metrics. So if you go talk to the marketeers, even the designers, in an organization, they will have all these reasons why we're not being innovative enough, right? We don't do this and we don't do that. But if you go talk to the technical people, especially the software engineers, they will all say the same thing. I guarantee it. Go talk to 10, and at least 9 will tell you, if you dig deep enough, we haven't invested in the tools. We have no ability to try things out, because every time we have a little bit of extra time, we're getting massive pressure to make the next thing. And I'm not being rewarded. I have no sense that I would ever get rewarded for building a new tool. And they're right. They don't get those rewards, so they never build the tools. And then it's like a cobbler's children have no shoes, where you have these incredibly bright people who are constantly trying to innovate with these terrible tools that they got from somewhere else. You know, Sir Francis Bacon has a quote I really like on this. He said, "When trying to achieve results that have never been achieved before, it is an unwise fancy to think that that can be accomplished with methods that have been used before." Being smart isn't good enough. You have to make some investments in these things. And the payback time is not measured at the scale of 5 years. Truly, it's like 5 months. But 5 months for companies big and small is a long time. And so it's scary as someone who's trying to drive innovation to say, go make me tools. I'm good with tools. That's just, it's too much to ask. Like, I'm telling you that would work even better, but I know practically that that doesn't work. So here's something a little bit easier. Every time somebody brings you an innovation, ask them to do 2 things. Number 1, bring with your innovation, when you come tell me about it, the main tool that you think helped you get there, whether it's something that we developed in-house or that you used externally. But you need to tell me what that tool was. And number 2, I want an idea paired with this innovation and that tool for how to make that tool better. I'm not even requiring that you do that right now, but at least tell me what you would do to make that tool better so we could go faster. Just doing that is something that they can do in a relatively small amount of time. And now when you bring me that idea, I can actually work with you and say, you know what, that's a really good idea. Let's make that a goal. That will count as your innovation for the next month, for the next quarter. Are you getting enough detail? You want me to go sort of lower level? Somebody ask another question. Yeah.
I'm interested. Tell me the story about how you do this at Google. I mean, do you have to kind of separate yourself from the entire corporate who's accountable to shareholders and don't have time for you to come on and tell them to make new tools? Do you just work with that core team? I mean, how's that work with such a big corporate now?
So I can't tell you a lot specifically about sort of how Google's structured and how I'm structured within Google, but I can tell you a little bit within my team. Let me give you an example or two. I have a team that's working on something. This is just a very crisp example. And I said to them on day 1, we will throw out every line of code that you're going to build for the next 6 months. I guarantee it. I will insist on it. I don't care if it solves world hunger. We're going to throw out every single line of code you write for the next 6 months. What this does, I told them something else in parallel, which is, especially in this early period where we have this big audacious goal and we're sort of trying to see if it even makes sense to go there. Abraham Lincoln once says, another one of my favorite innovation quotes, he said, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. Right? Figuring out what to do is most of the challenge. So don't worry, guys, we're going to build this software for 6 months. If we spend 5 of those 6 months figuring out what to build and 1 month building it, that'll be plenty. Right? Once you really know what to build, it doesn't take that long to build almost anything. All of it is exploration and the wrong paths and the retracing your step and the technology lock-in you get from trying to nurse along the thing that you did before. When I tell them we're going to throw it away, I help them in a number of ways. Number 1, now, while they're building, they can be freed of any of the sort of scalability issues. I might have to live with this later. I should add in these hooks for things that we're not going to do right now because I know we're going to do them later. All that, so I just saved you I tripled your speed right there. And I'm also guaranteeing that we don't get stuck in technology lock-in with a prototype system afterwards, which is what almost always happens. You're trying to go fast, you're trying to go fast. Ooh, is it good enough? Is it good enough? Is it innovative enough? And then the big boss says, it's awesome, go forward, really fast. Oh yeah, now we're going to stop and like go backwards and throw out all our code. If you haven't prepared to throw out your code, you won't do it. The only way to ensure you will throw out your code is to commit ahead of time you'll throw out your code and to be able to say, we have to throw out our code. It was built to be thrown out. It is not doable to build on top of this. Yes?
This is nice with the Google budget, but what do you do with the startup budget?
I actually think, look, I mean, I'll give an example with my hedge fund, which I used to run. I'm still on the board of directors of. We did something incredibly similar there, right? We wanted to prove that something was possible. We built something to prove it was possible. We actually started test trading using that system. We would all have guns in our mouths right now if we still had to be training with that same system. And we knew ahead of time that this trap existed, and it was very painful because we did not have an enormous budget. But it was the right thing to do. The reason that it looks like you have to have a big budget is because you're always measuring your progress on a 1 or 2 quarter basis. And it looks like over a 1 or 2 quarter basis you can't afford it. But the payback time on starting over is right at the limit of that. It's about 6 months usually, almost independent of the size of the software. And small companies tend to last more than 6 months, just like big companies do. So it doesn't take long. It's like breaking up your firewood. It's breaking up your furniture in the middle of winter to feed it into the furnace to save money. It looks like a good idea, but then like in the spring you have no furniture anymore, right? And small companies suffer from this all the time. So you have to have, yes, I guess if you have 1 month of runway, you're just not going to be successful. Like, I can pretty much guarantee you're not going to be successful unless you have very understanding funders. You have to plan for redoing these things. You have to have the discipline to say that this is the right thing to do. Let me give an example of something else. Rebuilding actually causes innovation. So you guys have all like written a paper or made a PowerPoint deck, and you lose it, right? It just gets eaten by, it goes to Tumbolia, you don't know where it is, and you have to start over again. And you don't make it the same the second time. You're really pissed that you have to remake it. I hate that feeling. But you make it better the second time. And yet, when we ask people to rebuild something, hardware and software, particularly egregious with software, we let them start from where they were. We almost never say start over. Now, if I were to suggest to you, this is a very concrete example, don't reward people for how many lines of code they write. Reward them from how many lines of code they delete. You're like, oh, right, please, Astro. That's such a gameable situation. Is it? If I tasked you with writing 1,000 lines of code or deleting 1,000 lines of code, you could add 1,000 lines of code that just don't get called. It's just 1,000 lines of code that computes some number and multiply it by 0, and you're right? It's just a constant 1. It has no effect on the software. It's easy. Try deleting 1,000 lines of code from something that already works. You have to deeply understand that thing in order to delete those 1,000 lines of code. And I guarantee you, you will make that piece of software better in the process of deleting those lines. Force people to start over. Build in this starting over, and you're not only protecting yourself from the bad parts of technology lock-in, you're actually driving innovation. It's part of why I do it. Right? This is scary, but it's very implementable. And if you can take a 2-year view, you're going to be wildly farther ahead over some 1 or 2 year period, even if it looks slower over some 3 or 6 month period. I'd mentioned before about picking the right problem. Let me talk about technology judo versus technology kung fu. So engineers are taught technology kung fu. That's just what they're taught. And great engineers are very proud of the fact that they can take a hard problem and make it work. They are not taught. It is just, there are engineers who are offended to hear this, but it is not the discipline of engineering to pick the problem. That is not what they are at least trained to do. Some of them happen to be really good at it, a small percentage. But that's not their training. Their training is in technology kung fu, on taking the problem as it is apparent and banging their way through it using their brilliance. And sometimes That's pretty cool. Sometimes there are deep scientific advances that require that kind of smarts and effort and time and number of people. And I suppose if that's what you're into, that's cool, and there's certainly a niche for that. But I believe that by far the radical things that happen, that we look back on and say are innovations, are not driven by technology kung fu. They're driven by technology judo. Technology judo is the observation, it's a perspective shift on the basis of technology. So voice over IP. If I came to you, back in the day when Skype was just starting up, and I said, there are these huge telecom companies, and they charge for phone calls. And there's now this service which connects like everybody on the planet, and it's free. If we could build telephone calls on top of a free raw material, then we could basically make money, have no variable cost, and totally like eat the lunch of the telecoms. I just gave you the idea without any of the technology, and I'm not trivializing voice over IP. There was hard work to be done there, but I believe that the bulk of the value that was added was in that story I just told you, right? That's technology judo. That's an observation, which once you have it, especially in many of the best cases, the technology, while it's not trivial sometimes, is not the hard part. It's having that idea and deciding that's the right tree to chop down. This is part of sharpening the axe in this somewhat mixed metaphor, is deciding on those things. PageRank is a great example of this. I can tell you the PageRank idea, which is, all these people were trying to understand what a web page meant by understanding it semantically. And Larry and Sergey said, hey, there's a lot of implicit knowledge about what these things mean embedded in the graph of how they point at each other. There was math and there was hard work after that, but it wasn't as important as that observation. That's technology judo. When Microsoft licensed DOS to IBM and got by far the better end of that deal, right? It was a terrible operating system. IBM was capable of making something much better in a tiny fraction of the time. But they were wrong, IBM was wrong in thinking that it wasn't what was important. And Microsoft was right in thinking it was what was important. And they won. They became a very large company on the basis of that observation, that it was worth having an operating system and being at the operating system part of that space. AdWords from Google is another great example. So the observation about the switch to an auction model, people didn't think that was the way to do it. And there were a whole bunch of social and economic reasons about how auctions worked, about how advertisers thought, that were the impediments to each of these ahas. And there was some nice math behind it, but it was the observation that you could run these auctions and find these sort of optimal prices without having to assert them. That was the beautiful part of that. So when I try to drive innovation, I work really hard to say, look, we'll do the hard technology work. This is related to, but it's different than the story. But how can we perspective shift, guys? Tell me what about the situation can be seen differently such that the technology problem gets easier or goes away. Don't tell me the hardest thing we can do. Tell me some weird cheat where there is nothing hard about the problem anymore. Yeah?
Hi, I'm Eric from Chicago. How often do you think it's the case that companies or individuals say they want innovation, but they don't really understand it? It's kind of like one of those hot, trendy words that everyone's going to claim they want it, but like concepts like diversity, people like the idea of diversity or innovation more than they like the reality of it. So oftentimes when they ask you for innovation, they have this preconceived notion of what they expect. So they're not really looking for something wild, but they're looking for something in line of what they already, think innovation is. So how often do you think this is the case? And when you do bump up into these situations, what should you do? Should you try to educate them, change the culture, look for a workaround, or just leave and go somewhere else?
No, you need to, that's a great question. You need to isolate the innovators from the people who have an emotional or a practical stake in the innovators being wrong. Right? And of course, these are rampant, right? If I'm working on version 1.2 and you're working on version 5.0, I don't want you to be right. because you're going to make me look stupid. I might literally lose my job. So it's important for me to go around telling everybody that you're wrong before you even started, before I really understand what you're doing, right? So there's a whole set of those things. It's also important that on the one hand, you vet the innovation ideas in good ways, but you have to be very careful because, as I said before, innovation is about counterintuitive things. And so often, the experts in any area are the least good at saying whether something will be the case. Because, I'll use this as an excuse to talk about this bottom one. In making innovation, I think a useful way to think about it is there's some, let's say there are 100 basic assumptions in some field. It doesn't matter whether it's biotech or social networking or anything in between. But pick your space. There are going to be some top 100 basic assumptions that people make about sort of how that world turns over. And innovation is picking some of those assumptions and breaking them. It also involves religiously following the best practices in the areas in which you're not actively breaking the assumptions. If you try to break all of the assumptions, I would say if you try to break even 10% of the assumptions, you're already outside of the range where innovation happens. That's too much. When somebody brings me an innovation idea, and there's and then a miracle occurs, and then, then the business plan goes on, I'm fine with that. That's usually required in an innovation idea, and an innovation story. But if you have, business and work and technology, innovation occurs, business, work, technology, another miracle has to occur and then it goes on, fail. That's too much. One, okay, two, too many, right? You have to figure out which assumptions to break. The problem is, of course, these assumptions were made by the experts. And the people who believe these assumptions the most are the experts. So if you come to the experts with a pile of assumptions and say, these are the 3 of your top 100 assumptions I want to shoot in the head, there's no one better on the planet than the experts to tell you why that's a dumb idea. If they didn't believe that, they wouldn't be assumptions, right? So you have to have a well-thought-out process for having very bright, critical thinking kind of people, but at least some of them from outside the field, to help you vet the ideas. And there are a small set of experts in each of the fields who generally are seen as kind of weird and wacky, who will go with you on that ride for a little while. They'll say, okay, tell me how. And then what happens? They won't say yes right away, but they at least won't say no right away. So I think this is a very useful way to think about it, and you need to sort of pre-plan for how you're going to vet things so you don't end up having it be a popularity contest among people who don't want you to win. Yes?
Hi, I have a quick question. It sounds like your process is very rigorous.
I'm glad I've fooled you into thinking so.
It's all about illusions. So my question to you is how many submissions do you get and how many do you approve? Just maybe annually.
So submissions look very differently, right? There's the drive-by kind of submission. Hey, Astro, what do you think about anti-gravity? Right on, right? I approve that, or did I reject it? No, I'm not being cute, but right, there's a lot of different things. And sometimes people will say, oh, I think that there's a big business in X, right? Where let's say, Astro, we should start a new religion, right? If somebody came and said that to me at Google, that might be an interesting idea, but it's, even for my group, far enough afield from what we're going to do, I'm going to say no. Not because it's a bad idea, but I have some sense of what's too, you can say too innovative, but I'm pretty confident Google's not going to become a religion anytime soon. So I can just say no to that one. It's not a full-out rejection, though. That's not a failure of their part to have brainstormed that. There are things which can go for a week or a month, and they can get no's for lots of different reasons. They can get no's because we work it out on paper, and it's just, it doesn't work. We can build a prototype hoping that the prototype will cause us some sort of big emotional swell. The aha we think we're going to feel, we'll really feel, and we'll be able to transmit it to other people. And we make the prototype, and the aha isn't there. We don't have that oh my God, this is going to change everything. Okay, it's just not worth it, right? Because if we can't even get ourselves to be that passionate, it's not worth going forward. So there's lots of different kinds of no's that happen. I don't know, on balance, probably 1 in 100 make it through to any kind of what I would consider longer term, bigger scale kind of thing. And that's not just about Google. I think that that's a more general kind of thing, is thinking about 1 in 100. If you're not saying no 99% of the time, you're not trying hard enough. And that means that the innovator or innovators that you're working with have to have very thick skins, and you have to find ways to reward them. Reward them more for saying no than for saying yes. I'm going to call on you in just a second, but let me make a point here. So I have this little funny chart in the bottom. This is another one of these things. It's right, and you won't do it. It's just shockingly hard to get yourselves to do it. All right, here's how it works. You have a group, 1 person, 10 people. They're working on some crazy idea. There's a milestone that's going to be coming up for them. You go tell them this. If you shoot for your milestone, you vote that we spend the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever, trying to hit the milestone, and you hit it, I will give you a bonus of X. If you shoot for it and you don't hit your milestone, I'm not going to give you the bonus. If you will say now that we should kill your project, I will give you 10% extra. I will give you X times 1.1. Guaranteed, because we're never going to know about whether you would have hit your milestone. I'll give it to you now. You don't even have to wait. Totally gameable, right? Everyone will just kill their projects. They don't, though. Almost nobody will do that, ever, for 10%. You know what we've just discovered? We've discovered that the market clearing price, the emotional, incremental pain of killing one's project is more than 10%. But those bonuses that you set for these people are so much bigger, are so much smaller than the total cost of running that experiment that you should just keep turning the dial up. I'll give you 20% extra, 1.3, 1.4. You keep turning it up in your organization till most of the time they vote no. You can't turn that dial up high enough and lose money, because the cost of dumb projects running forward is huge relative to those bonuses. And yet they don't want to become passionate. They should be passionate. But you're not in a good position. I'm not in the best position to kill these projects. These people are living and breathing this stuff 18 hours a day. It's all they do. How am I going to tell them that it's not going to work? I need them to tell me it's not going to work. But they have such a strong reason to say it's going to work. Right? Normally, it's not only that it's not 1.1 there, it's 0 in that second row. That's crazy. Of course, if it's 0, they're going to say, we should go for it. We should go for it. Because they get rewarded. They get to keep their job. They have less confusion in their lives if they keep doing today what they did yesterday. No one says, let's kill it. And they're going to keep doing that until you make it really appealing for them to kill it. Yes?
Mark from New Zealand. I'd be interested to hear you comment on Google Wave. Repeating the question, could you please comment on Google Wave?
No. And I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm not going to for 2 reasons. I'm relatively new to Google. I don't speak for Google, and I actually don't even spend a lot of time paying attention to the core Google stuff. This is another point about innovation, actually. I make it my business, not... I do a lot of networking with people at Google. It's some of the smartest people in the world, and I'm incredibly lucky to get to spend time with them, and I try to use them in the way I was just saying to help me vet my projects. If I can help them, I'm happy to help them. But if my job is to help us go that way, then the fact that we're doing this right now, I can't get sucked into that. Because if I do, then I'll end up thinking that that's the universe. And so that's actually the most important reason, is because I don't know. As a total aside, I happen not to use any kind of social networking. I mean, I use Gmail and GDocs, but I don't use Facebook really. I don't use Twitter, and so I'm for that reason also probably the wrong person to ask. Yes.
My name is Gustav from Sweden. I was wondering, like, Google is such a huge organization, so you have people everywhere in the world coming up with ideas on a lot of different problems. But how do you do to, like, if someone comes up with an idea in Guatemala, for example, which could be used directly to solve a problem in, like here in the US, like, how do you shape the channels to make sure that innovation in one part of the organization can be used to solve problems in another part of the organization. And like, how do you create the channels for the employees so that they always know that, okay, I'm going to this person, this place, this is like my forum.
Right. So the question is, innovation, even if you try to corral it into one place, tends to happen in lots of different places, and you have to be opportunistic about that reality. I have never seen it done well, and I don't have a secret formula like these secret formulas for how to do it well. I think innovation tends to happen in small groups that have a lot of structure. I'm trying to talk to you about the kinds of structure that I think even if you can create all of the structure I'm saying in a group that's all sitting together, it's still hard. It doesn't mean that it won't happen in a large company in lots of different places, but it's going to have to bubble up, and you have to depend on a sort of informal network and be willing to spend extra money to have some duplication of innovation. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that kind of systemization and keeping long lists, and it becomes art by committee. Just innovation is something that doesn't work well when everybody gets to vote for it. You know, like you get regression to the mean, which is the opposite of innovation. You have to let these sort of weird, fringy ideas grow up in groups that are self-contained with respect to these kind of incentives. They can get sort of a group think that's tight enough that the innovation, the weirdness, the counterintuitiveness can survive. Let me give you another example from up here. I mentioned this a little bit, but the effort to create version 2.0 of anything, that is innovation, as opposed to improvement, is often less than the cost of making the improvement. And again, it's just like nobody believes that that's true. But think about it. You have some product. Okay, it's a wearable body monitor, let's say. And I want you to make it 10% cheaper. We're already manufacturing it. Everyone's already expecting stuff 10% cheaper. How am I going to make it 10% cheaper? So now you're like fighting for a penny here and a penny there, and you're going to the contract manufacturers. That's what everybody does when you ask for 10% cheaper. That's incremental improvement. It's not worth nothing. But if I tell you, go make that 3 times as cheap, you won't even bother going to the contract manufacturer and fighting for the pennies. Because you know in 1 second that fighting for the pennies is not going to get you the body monitor 3 times cheaper. You're going to have to start over, right? Rebuild equals innovate. Part of the problem in companies is that we don't ask for big enough when we ask for innovation. We think that asking for 10% cheaper, like, wow, imagine if it's 10% cheaper, we're selling for the same amount. Basically, that drops to our bottom line. That's huge for our business. Fail. It's partly a fail because it's actually easier to ask for something bigger. So one of the things, I've tried this before, and I know other people, some of my mentors have tried this, and it's why I started trying it. If you go to the people in your organization and you tell them to make your, let's say, wearable body monitor for 3 times cheaper, for 1/3 the price, they will tell you immediately that it can't be done. Pretty much guarantee you that that's what they will say within 5 or 6 sentences of you asking for it. But if you go to them and you tell them that you heard on the QT that the competitor that you're most worried about is about to come out with a product which is 1/3 the price, they will scurry into the back room, and 2 weeks later, they will come tell you that they've figured out a way to make it 1/4 the price. It's not because they're lazy. That's not what just happened. It's like one of these little kids' stories where, like, you know, the little girl can't dance, and then the mom gives her the magic toe shoes that allow her to dance well, and then she's up there sort of dancing around, and then she finds out at the end of the story that there was nothing magic about the shoes, and it just gave her confidence. It's like that with your engineers. It's exactly like that. Seriously, I think of like giving them ballet slippers sometimes. Can you tell I have a young daughter? Really, they needed to believe it was possible. That's part of what's hard about innovation, is that we won't believe. We have blinders on. That's the meaning of counterintuitive. We don't really believe that you could make it for 1/3 the cost. And so when presented with the challenge, we say it can't be done. So you either need to task people to be your innovators who are just naturally good at not seeing those boundaries, at not having those blinders. And those people are exceptionally rare people, especially if they have any capability to make stuff. Or you have to find tricks to get people to believe that it's possible. And one of the ways that you can do that is by giving them goals that are really audacious. Because if you say 10 times better and they hit 3 times better, awesome, right? But if you say 30% better, they're going to hit like 5% better. And you haven't gotten anywhere. You haven't actually taken a jump. You've taken those little baby steps. There was a question here somewhere. Yes?
Yeah, it's a question of clarification. My name is Emily. I come from Kenya. I would like to know, you said earlier that you have to ask the teams to drop their projects. And I don't understand. Do you mean to say that they've been working on a project, which you have asked them to do?
Totally.
And then you ask them, drop everything you've been doing and forget about it?
Yes, exactly.
But, I mean, what would they lose if they drop it? Because, I mean, of course, there's hard work that has been put into that. But you're the guy giving the job. So if you tell me to drop it, I drop it. I mean, I don't understand the...
Maybe you know different engineers than I know, but all of the product people that I know won't take that deal for 10%. They become so emotionally invested in these things. And maybe you just have product people who are different than my product people, but they want so badly, especially if you've tasked them with innovation, they want so badly. They're like, it's an anti-gravity drive, Astro. You want me to throw away the anti-gravity drive? I just spent 6 months of my life. It's like we're levitating a grain of sand. Like, this is going to change everything, Astro. They're like out of their minds. You're bribing me, dude. You're going to give me 10% extra on a bonus to throw away an anti-gravity drive? Forget it, I'm quitting. I'm going to go start another company. That's what they feel like when you throw something away.
I understand that point, but you're paying them nevertheless. Even if they drop it, you're paying them, you know.
That's true.
So
Run the experiment.
It's more about what they attach to that project that they...
Exactly. They're not being dispassionate. They're emotionally attached to this. And you want to get them to the place where it's as appealing to them, emotionally appealing to them, to kill the project as to continue it, so that you can get from them an honest read on whether this project... Because remember, part of the issue here, let me hit this one. I think it's relevant. So I believe that the speed of innovation is inversely proportional to the half-life of mediocre projects. It is one of the, I think it's the widest spread myth in innovation that the hard part of innovation is coming up with radically cool ideas. That's just not true. I'll come up with them all day long. And I'm willing to bet that this group in particular could just go idea, 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 idea forever, right? And most of them are terrible. My ideas are terrible. I bet you most of your ideas are terrible. And unless you're Steve Jobs, which I'm not, and I'm willing to bet most of you are not, you can't just look at one of these ideas and know whether it's going to be like $1 billion a year business. It's hard to figure that stuff out on first blush. So what happens is that the rate-limiting step of innovation is not coming up with the ideas. It's killing the ideas. Now, you don't want to kill the very best ideas, but you need not only to kill the mediocre ideas, you even need to kill most of the good ideas. Because if you don't, you become constipated with good ideas, and the great ones can't come through, right? You want those few great ones. It's like a forest fire. You have to clear the way for them. And you very quickly get to the place where all the really dumb stuff is gone. And there are good reasons for the projects that people are working on. But you have to kill even most of them off. And it's so hard. And so if you believe that that's true, then you would become a maniac about what it is I can do to convince my entire organization to kill projects. That's not how we wire our companies, but it's how innovation works. Yes?
Yeah, but how do you do that without demoralizing the people that are working for you?
Because you have to teach them that because you have to talk to them about these things. This is not me against you. We're on a team. We want our business to be innovative. And I want to talk with you about these things which I believe. I hope in the end I can convince you that this is how the world works. Once we believe that this is how the world works, then when we kill a project, we high-five ourselves. I'm not just bribing you to kill a project, but we've won something when we kill a project. You have to believe that. Otherwise, you'll just quit. It'll be a frustrating place for you to be. But if I can convince you that innovation is stifled by the inability to kill projects, and we can actually open champagne when we kill a project because we made a kind of progress which is counterintuitive, but is critical for innovation, now you're signed up. And now we're making a kind of progress. It's extremely hard to make otherwise. I will call on a few more of you. Let me hit one more of these. So let me tell you what I want in an innovation story. This is, maybe different people are looking for different things, but this is my kind of stack. If you want to tell me about how we're going to change the world, I'm not really interested unless we're going to change the world. Number one, you have to tell me about a problem. There has to be some benefit, right? Something is wrong with the world, like 1 million people die in car accidents every year, ballpark $1 trillion a year is lost worldwide, and like people sitting in traffic and scratching up their cars and going to their high school kid's funeral because they were killed in an accident, and on and on and on. Right? That's a problem, or the benefit would be that the problem goes away. That's not good enough. Now you have to tell me a product or service which will release that benefit. So everybody is happy. Wow, that would be cool. Or everyone's sad and we're going to make them happy. That's a vision of the future, but that's not a product or service, right? So for the car accident example, a self-driving car is an example of a product which might release that value. Value to your company and value to the world. Okay. Now, you have to tell me that there's something hard about this. I don't believe it unless there's something hard. It might be how we sell it. It might be that we have to build it and it has to work. It might be the legal or regulatory barriers, whatever it is. But you've got to tell me what's really hard about this. I tend to be focused on things that have the right elements of technology judo and or technology kung fu. Tell me how we're going to make this and what the nugget is in the middle of this that's going to make it possible. And I need you to tell me why this didn't happen 3 or 4 years ago. If anyone could do this, and anyone could have done this a couple years ago, if you're fundamentally relying on us being smarter, or working harder, or even having more money, fail. Because there are people who are smarter than me, and there are people who are smarter than you. There are people who work harder than me, and they will work harder than you. There are even people who have more money than any of us, and they will apply it to this problem. We have to have a secret weapon, and you need to tell me what that is as part of this stack-up. A secret weapon can be, I have access to data that other people don't know about yet. I'm going to take an idea which worked in this totally other area and transplant it into this area. The reason that we're going to win is because I'm naive here, which, by the way, is allowing me to break the right assumptions. But I know which assumptions to break because I'm an expert over here in this other field. And I won here, or I watched other people win here, by breaking analogous assumptions. So let me actually mention about idea transplantation. That's, I believe, the easiest way to find a technology shift. Let me give you an example of what an idea transplant would look like. I mentioned PageRank, right? This network that sort of implies all this wisdom without actually having to derive it manually about each page, right? Really good idea. A transplant might look like this. In the finance world, instead of trying to figure out what each stock is going to do, maybe there's a network that we can imply from how these companies sell and buy from each other that we can then do a PageRank algorithm off of. I have no reason to believe this works. I'm giving you an example, right? Where we imply a network of who's doing business with who, and then we find which companies are leading indicators to which other ones and use this graph. And let's say maybe magically this turns out to be like the greatest quant strategy of all time, right? That would be taking a PageRank idea, an idea from this one area, and transplanting it into another area. That is not the same as, oh, Facebook worked. I'm going to make Facebook for doctors. I'm going to make Facebook for dentists. I'm going to make Facebook for dogs. This is not transplanting an idea. This is Me Too. And the best case scenario of a Me Too idea, you might make a lot of money off of it, but it's not an innovation. It's an instance from a class. Innovation is about building a new class, right? So, but that is a great way to try to make progress, is to say, what ideas have worked in other areas that we could move over, right, into our area? Yes?
Sambu from Hungary. Okay, just a quick question. You didn't kill your product. You really believe in it, and it's a great innovation. How do you prevent it not to be killed by the corporation, and how do you implement?
Okay, so you're assuming that you're inside of a larger corporation, and you have something which you believe in passionately, and you need to sell it to the organization. It very much depends on what motivates that organization. If you don't have someone fairly high up in the organization who has absolutely mandated this kind of innovation, not necessarily the specific innovation, but this kind of rule breaking, which is fundamentally what innovation is, you're done, just go do something else. Sorry, right? If such a will exists in the organization, then it is all you have to do is demonstrate that you are doing what they asked, right? So typically, organizations that want to be innovative want you to do the impossible. They want you to show that it is a successful business before you actually build it, which isn't possible. They want you to be able to do something that will scale and that doesn't require any money, also not possible. They want you to break all of the rules of the experts while simultaneously getting all of the experts in the field to say that it's the smartest thing that they've ever seen. And so you just have to slog through saying, it is not reasonable to ask that all of the experts, I'm just going to pick that as an example, agree that this is a brilliant idea. Steve Jurvetson has a rule that I think is particularly good. Draper Fisher Jurvetson is a venture firm here in the Valley, and they specialize, I think, on taking particularly big moonshots in their investing. And his rule of thumb is you want about 3 or 4% of the smart people in a field to think it's the smartest thing they've ever seen, and the other, call it 96, 97%, to think it's the stupidest thing they've ever seen. If nobody agrees with you, you're wrong. If you can't find a single person who is wise, senior, somewhat expert in something related to what you're doing, you're just wrong. But if everybody agrees with you, you're definitely too late, right? And there's nothing interesting about it, right? So this is if I were bringing the innovation to you and you were my boss, this is part of what I would do, is I would work with you through this. It doesn't make sense for you to ask me for all the experts to want this. What I'm asking you to do is hold me to the 3 or 4% one. If I can find you a couple senior people in this field who will say that they would quit what they're doing and come here to do it with us, that's how big they think it is. If I can find a couple of those people, will that move your needle? Right? I need you to tell me, if you're my boss, what it is that you're going to hold me to as I'm developing this. Set up some milestones, and then start knocking them down. Ideally, you and me can together make a set of milestones that are not distracting to me, but are the things that I really ought to be doing anyway as part of my innovation process. Let me give an example here. One of the best places to look for innovation is where people are torturing themselves, right? So there's a particular field where it doesn't even count as torture, and people are very used to harvesting the weirdness, and that's the pharmaceutical industry. It's called off-label use. And it's what the pharmaceutical industry lives for. It's where they make their money. And like most of what their marketing departments do is try to increase off-label use, or eventually, through these phase 4 trials, get it to be on-label use, because then they can amplify it even further. But that's like go sniffing around. They get it approved in a big enough area that they can get something out, and they're hoping that the doctors will use it where they're not supposed to use it, discover some use for the drug that they didn't even know about, or anyway couldn't claim. And then when there's enough of that, then they go try to prove it and get it on-label, and they sort of expand their market that way, right? Good idea. But that's not what happens in most tech companies. You remember a time when everyone was like jailbreaking the iPhone? People were screaming, we want to make things that run on this phone, please. That's what they're saying, right? And eventually, right, we got to the place with the iPhone and the Android now too, where you can develop in easy enough ways. People don't jailbreak the phones anymore. It's just not worth it. I used to run a body monitoring company. And for years, we had this argument where I said, on the board, we were having this argument where I said, we really need to make an abstract programmer's interface so that people can work on top of our data and they don't have to reinvent our wearable body monitors. They can build applications on top of it. And there were all these reasons why we shouldn't do it. Nobody will want it. The FDA is going to freak out, because what if these people build something weird and that FDA doesn't like, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm not saying that those arguments had no value. But in the end, what really won the day was slowly a community of people started appearing on the net who were jailbreaking our armbands, right? They were figuring out how to hack our armbands so they could build applications on top of it and sharing the tools of their trade with each other to help them move faster. When people are doing that, they're like clubbing you like a baby seal about what the innovation is, the opportunity is. All you have to do in those cases is listen. I'm calling it cleanup, right? But there's a lot of innovation that can happen by going out and saying, what is the most painful and awkward set of things that people are doing right now? And they're still willing to do it. Because if they're willing to go through that much pain and that much awkwardness to get that done, imagine how many more people would do it if we made it easy, right? I'm trying to, so here's another one of my favorite ones. There's something so odd going on. In the VC world, in the entrepreneurship and the startup world, it is absolutely 101. You don't invest in the idea, you invest in the entrepreneur, right? Everyone's heard that, everyone's like, oh yeah. Is that what happens in companies? Isn't that weird? I find that really bizarre. That it's so obvious, it's so like there's no other way to do it. I mean, I'm the VC, you come to me, I want to hear your idea, but in the end, I know I'm betting on you, and you know that I'm betting on you. That's like completely explicit. And yet, if you were my boss, and I want to innovate, which is awfully like being an entrepreneur inside the organization, and I say, functionally, I have some interesting ideas, but they're going to change over time, and what I really want you to bet on is me. Shouldn't be hard. You hired me. You asked me to innovate. And yet that's not what companies do. The probability of innovation given Bob is absolutely higher than the probability of getting your innovation given any particular idea. And the innovation world, entrepreneurship, knows this, right? It would be possible to argue, I suppose, that that wasn't true, that there's this disconnect, but the big companies are right. If they were getting more innovation done than the entrepreneurs. But where does the innovation happen? With the entrepreneurs. So if all of the innovation is happening where this rule exists and not in the place where it doesn't exist, all things being equal, it is not crazy to assume that the rule outside of the big companies is better than the rule inside the big companies. And this is, again, it's actually not about big companies. I've seen 50-person companies where the very people who started the company come up with something which is going to kill their own company. They're like, wait, I know we've been doing, the car with round wheels for the last couple of years, but these square-wheeled cars, oh my God, they're just going to crush the round-wheel cars. And everyone's like, guy, we just got the round-wheel car thing moving. Just shush, go back, go file some patents or something. No one wants to hear about it, right? If we were willing to bet on them the first time, it doesn't make sense not to do at least some betting on them in the future. It's intellectually dishonest, I think. It's a disconnect that most companies indulge in. So, yeah.
Yeah, you were, when you're talking about the judo technology versus Kung Fu, I don't know, I felt like there's a disconnect from reality. You were talking about engineers, that they are Kung Fu, which they just bang their heads. Well, I'm an engineer. The training I got was detecting the problem, going around to find a solution, not go through banging my wall through the head. So,
I'm not doubting that you know this, and I don't doubt that you have a degree in engineering, but I haven't seen much engineering training where it is the engineering training which teaches people to change the problem. That's what I'm talking about by technology judo. Technology kung fu is solving the problem. Technology judo is changing the problem. And I would say very roughly that the process of changing the problem is what an entrepreneur does, sometimes what a designer does, occasionally what a marketer does. It's not that engineers can't do that. I just think that's not where the teaching of how to change the problem happens. And so there are obviously world-class engineers who are also quite good at changing the problem, but it is not what they're taught as a whole. And I'm just making the observation that we either need to teach the engineers more about how to change the problem instead of just solving the problem. That's perspective shifting. Or pair them with people who are good at asking other questions, right? So if you give to an engineer the problem of making a vase for holding flowers, they'll come up with all kinds of fancy solutions. A designer, a really great designer, will say, do you want a vase or do you want a mechanism for displaying flowers, right? Because I think you just want a mechanism for displaying flowers, and I want you to loosen the constraints from vase, which has a bunch of stuff set up in it that I don't actually think is part of your constraints that you really want to give me. I want the space to be as big as possible so I can find the nicest solution possible. That process is more like design thinking than like engineering thinking. That's my point. Yes?
Hi, my name is Sari from Mali. Can you give us some insights on this whole concept of social innovation?
Sure. So by social innovation, I assume you mean like social entrepreneurship, finding ways in a for-profit mechanism to generate positivity for the planet. Am I correctly interpreting your question?
It's possibly. I mean, microfinance is the
sure
example of what a social innovation.
Exactly. So I think there's almost nothing up here. The word technology appears a few times, but for the most part, this is fairly divorced from technology and entirely divorced from the profit motive. As a total aside, I completely don't believe in non-for-profits under almost any circumstances. I think the profit motive just tends to drive success, even in social change for the better. And I think probably there's some limit. There are non-for-profit foundations that ought to exist, but we could lean way harder towards trying to marry two things together, which I think are very natural partners. That is the profit motive and trying to make the world better on some particular front. I don't see that those things are in opposition to each other, and I think there's lots of examples that are to the contrary. I realize that's not a specific example, but just overall my attitude is you can apply these things to social entrepreneurship and to social change. I would take nothing off this list, basically. Like, for example, these little bets versus big bets. My God, why would we place $1 billion bet, about how to solve clean water if we could place, 100 $10 million bets? It's just better, right? Because one of them, for reasons that are not apparent to us, is going to take off. And if we can't predict it, let's take 100 bets. It costs us the same amount of money, and then we'll actually know which one to pour the gasoline on. Yeah?
Do you believe that open innovation projects like Dell ID Storm are efficient inside companies?
I think there are. It's a good question. There are lots of different mechanisms that are orthogonal to many of these issues. So some people like to have these war rooms where they pin everything up on the wall. Some people do these scrums. How many of you have done like the scrum kind of thing, sort of rapid engineering? It's like for 3 weeks, we're going to get something done, we're going to put it out, we do it again. That's fine. That's not, none of those styles of innovation are in opposition to the things that I'm talking about. I'm talking about an environment that is separate from the style. I'm talking about the emotional and practical pressures that people put on each other and on themselves that block innovation and that you can do practical things against. In that context, you can do lots of things to whatever style you want to drive innovation. I don't actually have much of an agenda around that, and I often will let people do their own styles. Some people are very sort of build it and then I'll decide if it makes any sense style. Some of them like to bounce off people. Some like to do it themselves or write white papers. I don't know that you can dictate that. People have different styles in the details, but I think that there's some bigger ideas here with the practical stuff I've attached to them that if you don't do them, you are essentially guaranteeing, no matter what your style, that you won't get innovation. Yes?
Thank you. I'm really loving your presentation.
Thanks.
Sharon from Johannesburg and New York. Can you give us a couple of examples of where you are contextualizing some of the amazing things you're sharing with us for those of us who are, one-woman shop, two-woman shop, three-woman shop, where you've got, a group of entrepreneurs, it's a small shop, and everybody's innovating and everybody's wanting to innovate. For example, in a situation like that, would you suggest, that I make Chaba the innovator, and because we're all wearing different hats all the time, and it's part of where we are in terms of our organizational growth and development as a startup.
It's a fair question, but 3-5-person companies can be in very different phases. If you are fundamentally in an innovation phase, you haven't had the aha. If you're ready, if you've already had the aha and you can come to me and say, like, I know how to defy gravity, fine. Then someone should be in charge of the innovation and someone should be in charge of engineering and someone should be in charge, even if they're just 3 of you, of like getting the VCs or some large company to say yes. Right? That split makes sense. If you haven't had the aha yet, then you're all on the same team. And it is, with 3 people, you can all basically spend all of your time on innovation as a small group. But you need to decide first, which phase are we really in? If you're really in that innovative phase, if it's like 3 girls and a dog, awesome. That's like as good as it's ever going to get, honestly. And you could just bang on each other all day long and try things and throw them out. And most of this is not yet really relevant for you because in order for there to be pressure, there has to be some differentiation. You're like all stem cells still, Yes?
Hi there, Lilia Tam from Berkeley. So we're all innovators and entrepreneurs in a certain, well, we've talked a lot about how innovators and entrepreneurs are basically psychopaths. So how do we keep all of our innovators in big companies like this happy and healthy and producing long-term innovation without driving themselves and each other crazy?
I think there's a lot about expectation setting. This is a really important question, especially as companies get larger, because the way to scare off your best people is to stick them in an innovation bucket, ask them to innovate, and then completely block all of their attempts to actually innovate. And of course, whoever it is that's in between them and the resources doesn't see themselves as blocking innovation. That's never how it feels, right? They think that they're being wise and they're applying these sort of business rules that these crazy, wacky entrepreneurs weren't applying. Look, I have these business issues, PR issues. We can't be seen as doing this wacky thing that you're suggesting. I have 1,001 all completely legitimate things. You, as the innovator or the group of innovators, can't begrudge me the bigger issues of the business. They're not going away. I have to realize that I'm going to drive you crazy if I'm not a good communicator to you. So what we need to do is we need to sit down on a regular basis and make sure we understand what I expect from you and what my constraints are. If I tell you ahead of time, look, we're a healthcare company, and so like porn and the military are right out. Like that's just not in our brand, right? You just have to live with that. What's not going to work is if I don't tell you that, and then you come to me with some cool new missile, and I'm like, we're a healthcare company. Sorry, we're just not going to do missiles because it's a PR problem for us. That was bad communication on my part. I mean, maybe it was a bit of a failure on your part not to intuit that, but we need to have the communication be crisp enough that I can tell you what my requirements are. It is the essence of great design to solve problems creatively within constraints. You say you're a world-class entrepreneur, a world-class problem solver, awesome. Here are my constraints. Here's the money I can give you. Here's how much I will let you go forward before you have to pass some milestones, get signed off by experts or get some taste in the market that it's real. But I have to tell you what those things are, and then you don't have to imagine. Those are the constraints, and then if you go solve those problems within my constraints, and then I block you, you should quit, right? And often, of course, because people are bad communicators, you try. I wasn't a very good communicator. Then you think, okay, I didn't get a yes, but maybe I misunderstood. And you try 2 or 3 times, and I keep blocking, and you get sick of it, and after a year or 2, you quit. And that's why great people leave larger organizations, or even not so large organizations, exactly because of this. And the way to prevent it, I believe, is great clarity of communication about what those constraints are. And it means I have to be somewhat consistent, which is a scary thing for me, right? Because I don't know what you're going to come up with. So if I have to write down ahead of time a set of things such that if you meet these expectations, I'm not just going to blow you off, and you get to be as crazy as you want. It's like one of those little genetic programming things that sort of finds the bug in the simulator to cheat to solve the problem. You're going to be like that. You're just thrashing around trying to find some crazy way to sort of get what you want and meet my expectations. So a lot of it's incumbent upon me to be thoughtful and be consistent. Yeah?
Hi, Tomer from Israel. I started to touch on this point, but how do you deal with your own bias towards certain ideas?
I think everybody needs bias. Your bias is built out of your experiences, and I certainly hope for myself and for all of us that our experiences are worth something. So my bias will cause me to say no or create pressures away from some good ideas. I accept that. What we're going to hope, I mean, if my job is to create innovation, then somebody has placed a bet that my biases, while they will cut off some good ideas, will cause, on balance, a higher percentage of good ideas to sort of rise up than if someone picked randomly or someone with less experience were to do this. So it's good to know your bias. It's good to surround yourself with people. I think this is true of me, depending on how much you can stand it, to surround yourself with people who aren't interested in bullshit, who tell you actually what they think. You want people who are smarter than you. You want people who are more creative than you, and you need to earn their trust. You need to encourage them to tell you that you're an idiot on a frequent basis. And then, when they do, you need to swallow hard and say thank you. Because if you don't the first time, they'll never do it again. But if you do the first couple of times, you will get a flood of new perspectives. I'm not personally interested in diversity for its own sake. What I want is mental diversity, which, of course, it turns out you need sort of ethnic and gender and all kinds of sort of human diversity in order to get mental diversity. But mental diversity is where innovation comes from. You want new perspectives, but you have to earn the right to those new perspectives. So I have my own biases, but because I'm aware of my bias, my set of biases, then at least I can beg you to bring your bias to the table and to call my bias out when you see it. And I need to be really good about saying thank you and being calm and not just freaking or dismissing you because your bias is different than mine. Because as soon as I start doing that, I've just decided I don't want to be an innovator anymore. Yes?
Evans from England. Part of the thing that we do here at Singularity is the team projects. How would you design a process to take ideas from the 80 people in this room and distill them into the best 6 of which teams could form around? Well,
actually, I'm inviting you all to come talk to me at the end of the summer and give me 5-minute pitches. That'll kick it off. Number 2, I've given you a roadmap for how I want you to tell me the story. Tell me what the benefit is and how that benefit will absolutely, no question, change the world. Tell me what the product or service is that will release that benefit, the goodness to the world and the value to the organization that's building it. I need you to tell me how we're going to do it and that there's something, in the case of Google in particular, something hard technology-wise in the middle of that, it's the core of that. And I need to tell you, like, why now? Right? So that's not a roadmap for how to create it, but at least I've told you a format that you can sort of drive towards. And in terms of churning through those things, I'll give you some of my, techniques. So where are the big problems? This is not a secret. Agriculture, energy, the construction industry, healthcare, finance. I mean, there's only 8 or 9 of the really big problems in the world. The parts of that are the lowest hanging fruit, let's see, the parts where good process hasn't been introduced, the parts where technology is still sort of circa 1980. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to find where the buckets are. Now, often people are like, I don't want to play in waste management. You know what? If you don't want to play in waste management, someone else is going to, and they're going to clean up there. Like, often the places which are the really big wins, if I said telecom, you'd be like, no thanks. But voice over IP sounds sexy. Don't start with the idea I'm suggesting as a process. Start by digging out the problems, right? Find these places where there's got to be something better, even if you have no idea what it is. Then pick a couple of those and just start brainstorming at them. I bet you something will happen. Yes?
This is Mint from Thailand. So I'm very fascinated by what you just presented. So I'm going to actually offer a more cynical point of view.
Please, I'm doing just what I said. I love it. Bring it on.
Okay. So how much longer do you think your framework, which you'll be using to apply to come up with innovation, be able to create innovation? Because in itself, it's a fixed framework in a sense. So how much more innovation can you get out of a fixed framework, which you think it's creating innovation?
So, I mean, I'll give you some off the cuff. It's a great question. I don't know the answer. Obviously, that's more of an experimental question which you're asking, so time will tell. But I'll give you some thoughts. Number one, I made this slide last night. So I think we can say, though, I'm still in a fairly dynamic range, right? Number two, even if I had made this a long time ago, I'm certainly not against changing these things, discarding them, or finding an example where, you know what, that's not 10%, it's actually 20%, because you show me a really interesting example where someone broke 20%, and I'm like, you know what, you're right. And then I go back to this slide metaphorically, and I change that 10% to 20%. I would like to believe that me and all of you are constantly trying to refine our rules of thumb for how to do this. And, you can't have a purely static process or you're not learning. At the same time, it's good to have mantras because it's too hard to have. A lot of what I'm talking about here is what it takes to get people to do uncomfortable and unnatural things in their work, right? Emotionally, intellectually, they're getting them outside of their comfort zone and getting your boss outside of their comfort zone. Doing that, you can try to turn it into some it's changing every 10 seconds kind of process. I'm not saying that that can't work. Maybe it can. Maybe there's a great innovation waiting to be had there. But I believe that things are so badly done right now that what you're proposing is a great next step, but I don't think we've even hit this one yet. And so I'm willing to bet that on the way to your suggestion, we have a good bit of this to do. And it's possible that some of this could be automated. I love the idea that over time you could get people, instead of voting on what makes sense, you could find ways for people to say, I buy that, right? So, at Kickstart, the place where you can sort of get people to pre-buy your ideas, that's like an innovation jump starter, right? Maybe there are things like that internally. I'm trying to build on your idea where we can actually organizationalize some of these things so that instead of it comes to the boss, it becomes more of a network of vetting these ideas, of making sure they're killed, in the same way that we do 360s in a company on people so that you get your peers to say what they think. Maybe we should do 360s on every one of our projects, right? Maybe that. So I'm open to it. Yes?
I had a question about what the intersection is between innovation and forecasting. Yesterday we had a workshop on forecasting where we all had to build out these timelines in different issue areas. And one of the things that I left thinking was we actually know a lot about what the future is going to look like based on what is going
Totally
on
agree.
now.
Yep.
And so do you have any comments on that? And also, how do you tap into that in your head? Because we could do it during this exercise, but when you sit there and like, I want to innovate, it doesn't always happen.
Great. So I'll give you two somewhat different perspectives on the same thing. So as you may have brought up yesterday, another one of my favorite quotes, Alan Kay said the best way to predict the future is to invent it, which is somewhat to say that forecasting isn't everything, right? And that these innovations are often discontinuous because they're counterintuitive. There are some Kurzweilian curves, right? And there are other things that just change. And the things that just change, we can't predict, and they fall into the Alan Kay mold of the best way to predict the future is to invent it. There are other things which are on paths that we can bet about. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but 10 years from now, computers are going to be a lot faster than they are now. Probably a lot faster. And storage will be cheaper, and bandwidth will be higher. We don't know exactly how, but that's a pretty safe bet. So a way which you could systematize innovation when you see some trends, some forecast, which you believe is relatively safe, is, as Wayne Gretzky said, to skate to where the puck is going to be. They asked Wayne Gretzky at one point how he got to the puck faster than other people did when there were much younger kids on the ice. He'd been playing for like 20 years. And he said, because I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where it's going to be. If you know where it's going to be, there's a great company called Color Kinetics. And early on, they caught a wave. They saw something that other people, the big companies, hadn't seen. They saw that LEDs were on an illumination path that went like that per dollar, and the cost and the failure rates was going like that, and that it was only a matter of time, even if it was going to be a decade, before on a cost basis, per lumen, LEDs just started crushing of the incandescent light bulbs. And they built an entire business around that at least 7 or 8 years before that path crossed. And when that path crossed, Philips bought them for almost $1 billion, right? Because they just bet on it. And I mean, they did a lot of really interesting things otherwise, but fundamentally what they were doing was they saw that path and they skated to where the puck was going to be. And I believe you could do that in biotech or in social networking or in any of these other things, assuming you pick the right thing to bet on. Yes? Hey, Astro, we're kind of running out of time. Sure. Sure, one more question.
Hello. So Pablo from Uruguay. It's actually 2 quick questions. One is, you mentioned that the VC model of investing in people or teams usually works much better at innovation than investing on projects. But I'm not sure if you were able to implement something like that in your company and how you did it. And the second one is, what is the graph on the top right of the slide?
Sure. So very quickly on both of those, the first one is, yes, I do implement it. I do try to bet on people rather than bet on ideas. And functionally, however much room you give someone to fail, that's exactly how much room they have to succeed. If you want them to innovate, if you want them to change the world, you have to give them an enormous amount of room to make a big mess and a big failure. There is no other way. That's just a fact about the world. And big companies can pretend all day, and small companies can pretend all day long that that's not true, but that's just the way it is. And because I believe that, I give the people who work for me, who I task with innovation, a lot of room to fail. That's fundamentally betting on them rather than betting on their ideas. The second question you had, the upper right-hand corner, this was part of this same thing. It was related to the rule breaking. One of my definitions of innovation is improvers spend their time saying, how can we understand the people who are mainly using our product, the big hump there, and make it better, make that other hump a little bit bigger. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. Most people spend all of their time doing that. And they say it is inefficient for us to focus on the small hump. And innovation is fundamentally asking the question, what's that other hump? What are those people doing? And how could we make that hump, if we got it just right, 10 times as big as the other hump? All right, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your ideas. Thanks.